you all for joining. This is a webinar focused on Fabric and Power BI. Our presenter today is going to be Gary Bell with Covenant Technology Partners. Gary is a lead data architect, and Gary has a distinguished career. He has both a finance degree and an MBA from the Cotton Bowl champion Missouri Tigers, Mizzou, M-I-Z, and he's been doing data analytics and data architecture for 25 years, 10 of which has been here at Covenant. So we're very grateful for Gary and his talent, sharing his talents with us here. My name is Doug Meyer. I'm going to be serving as your facilitator today, and I'm also going to be monitoring the questions that in the chat. And then we also have Emily Mundle. Emily's also going to be helping to help me with the chat and also managing the questions and the responses. So those are the three main folks from Covenant. So again, thank you all for coming. As we get going here, we always like to, we have a pretty good crowd. It looks like we have 40 now, and we expect actually probably about 10 more. So a pretty good crowd, but we always like to make sure we understand, who's in the audience here. So we'd like to start with a couple questions, and we're going to survey you. So if you don't mind, you can just answer the questions online there. So Gary, if you want to go to the first question.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first question, does your organization have an enterprise data warehouse or a data mart or a data lake? So if you don't mind just clicking on that, choose your answer. Okay, the next question, what is your organization's primary reporting tool? All right, so what we're trying to understand is, are you already using Power BI extensively? Are you using other competitive tools and considering moving off? Are you using more of a legacy tools? And you're learning how to do more contemporary data analytics with that. So please answer that question. The next question, does your organization currently have a Power BI premium capacity? All right, because obviously if you're already at that level, you have more opportunities. And then lastly, approximately how many report consumers does your organization have? So in other words, how many people are using reports on a regular basis that you or your team are helping provide? Okay, and then just hit submit there, and then we can tally that up, and that'll help advise. So here looks like on the first one we have 50% have a data warehouse but on-prem, and it looks like 24% are in the cloud. Looks like 71% are using Power BI, so majority of the team are using Power BI, so that's good. A little bit of other, a little bit of Tableau. Okay, good. A lot of folks have Power BI Premium, so that's great. And then looks like majority of folks are in the 100 to 500 users. We have some that are north of 500 and some that are south of 500. So, all right. Well, thank you all for your guidance there. That helps us. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Gary.
Okay, great. Thank you, and welcome everyone. So just a quick kind of high-level agenda for us in terms of what we're going to try to go through today. Quickly kind of go through high level what Fabric is, and we'll talk about the goals for that in a moment. And again, focus really on some of the changes and how that affects Power BI workloads specifically. We're going to jump in. We're going to spend about half of our time kind of going through some demo of Fabric kind of features and functionality in action. And then I wanted to save 10 or 15 minutes at the end for licensing options, because as much as everybody loves to talk about licensing, there are some real questions that kind of come up frequently as it relates to Fabric and what that means for people that are already using Power BI and the different ways to license that, and et cetera, et cetera. So to talk about some of what changes on the licensing side, how you pay for this, run through a few different scenarios for what that could look like, and talk about maybe the benefits there. So to kind of get started, I wanted to talk about really my goals here for today in terms of what I'm trying to present. Fabric itself is a pretty broad and wide-ranging topic, and so we're not. I'm gonna talk for just a couple minutes about kind of what it is and the the wide view of it. But we are really going to spend our time focused on what it means for Power BI users, and it sounds like from the polling results that we just discussed a moment ago that most of you are on Power BI. That was kind of as expected. I'm kind of pleasantly surprised to see a number of you already have Power BI premium capacities, and we'll talk about why that's important and what that means from a Fabric perspective. Talk about just kind of some of the benefits of Fabric for Power BI, and get into some of the questions about how it potentially changes how you get data into Power BI, how some of the architectural decisions about maybe your data warehouse, data mart kind of levels, and what that means. So again, what it's not, what we're not going to be able to cover here today is really to go deep on Fabric itself. As you'll see here in a moment, there are a number of different workloads or kind of personas, is the way they lay it out in Fabric. We're really just going to and even on the Power BI side, it's certainly not going to be a real technical deep dive. We'll get into a little bit of code. We'll show a little bit of demo stuff, but we only have 45 minutes or so here today. We can't go too deep. So it's really about what I hope you can take away from this is a better understanding of what Fabric means for Power BI and how that could affect some of your decisions moving forward.
And Gary, and just an FYI that we've also done webinars specifically on deeper dives on Fabric specifically, and we do have those recordings if you're interested in, and we will be doing more in the future as well. So if you do want to go deeper into Fabric, just let us know and we'll make sure that you're invited to those events.
Of course. All right. So again, since we're going to talk about Fabric and what it means for Power BI, I figured we'd lay the groundwork here, and so. Some of you may be familiar with this. I'm sure if with as many of you as are using Power BI, you've at least noticed kind of the branding as you've opened up Power BI over the last 6 months. You probably noticed that instead of flashing a little Power BI graphic on there now, it flashes one of these new little F logo Fabric kind of stuff, and that may be the biggest change you've noticed right out of the box, right? It's just some of the maybe some of the colors change, some of the but Fabric. In itself is, I really like to think of it as taking kind of Power BI and kind of expanding it across the rest of the data stack here. So Power BI has always kind of been this. Let's talk about kind of the core tenets here. So Power BI has always been a software as a service offering, from its inception. If you look across a few of these other workloads here that they're folding into Fabric, we've got Data Factory and what they're just calling data engineering, some data science stuff, the warehousing components, and this real-time piece, or kind of the 6 core pillars of this offering. Power BI has kind of been the exception to date in terms of it being offered as a software as a service or a SaaS offering. These others are kind of being rolled into that model, and everything's going to be kind of focused on this unified underlying OneLake, this unified data lake technology that's going to be shared across these various workloads, including Power BI, and that is going to be a notable change, and that's something that we're really going to kind of focus on during the demo here and kind of what that means for it. But the idea behind it is that you've got really one centralized copy of your data. It lives on this data lake, and you can use it across the various workloads that you see up top. Now, none of this is revolutionary. It's more of an evolutionary change. Again, all the items that you see up here, these other workloads, are all things that you've been able to do in the Azure Data Stack for a number of years with a number of different tools. It's really the convenience and the collectivization of these tools under kind of this one Fabric umbrella, with the OneLake being the central hub of that is the evolution here. And as such, since we're pulling all these things together, now you get this one nice centralized admin. So it makes some things around sharing and security a lot simpler, especially as you get to kind of this one version of your data in the one lake. It starts to bring all that stuff together instead of spreading it across a number of different tools and technologies. And then finally, again, it kind of takes this. This is a kind of a core tenet of what Power BI has been for a number of years. Kind of this low code kind of approach to data analytics. You've got your Power BI desktop kind of tool that makes it easy for business analysts, business users to kind of get in and do enough to be dangerous. But you also have a kind of a fully formed kind of pro development environment that sits behind it as well. So it's a little bit of a mix and best of both worlds, if you want to think of it like that. And again, the way I kind of brand this, it's really I'm going to kind of coin this term, the Power BI-ification of the rest of the Azure stack. So from a Power BI user standpoint, it's not immediately going to be a big change. The big change in a lot of cases is kind of this software as a service model for a variety of these other workloads. All right, that's not to say though that there aren't any benefits or changes for the Power BI side. So let's jump over and talk kind of zoom in on the Power BI. We'll touch base on a few of these others, notably maybe some data factory and data engineering and data warehousing kind of as it folds into Power BI eventually. But again, we're gonna focus mostly on the Power BI side. So what does this mean for Power BI? What about Power BI? Power BI, as I mentioned a moment ago, you again may have noticed some of the branding changes, but Power BI itself kind of lives on in much the same form and fashion that it always has. So no, the good news here is that you're not having to upgrade any Power BI stuff you've already done. There's no migration in order to go from Power BI to Fabric. Power BI just kind of folds neatly into this wider ecosystem, which is Fabric. And in many ways, it lends its structure and governance to a lot of those other workloads that we talked about. So in the past, we've always had Power BI workspaces, for example, as a place to collect our various data models, or what they're now terming semantic models, reports and dashboards, and all those things have always belonged to a workspace in Power BI. They've taken that concept for Fabric and expanded it to now include things like Lakehouse and the various data engineering. So you've got some data pipelines and flows that we might talk briefly about. You've got some of your data science workloads. All those entities, all those objects now can also live within a I almost called it a Power BI workspace. They're no longer really Power BI workspaces. They're Fabric workspaces, and there are a number of additional objects that can now live within those workspaces. But from a Power BI standpoint, again, the ones that we've always had remain, and they don't really require any changes as you move to kind of a Fabric environment. If you're a Power BI Premium user, and we had quite a few of you kind of raise your hand and say that you already have a Power BI Premium capacity in your organization. For those that maybe aren't aware or are confused because of the licensing speak, a Power BI Premium capacity is kind of a reserved instance of Power BI for your organization, and it allows as many users as you want to connect to it and view reports, and give you some other kind of higher level Power BI features as well, data marts, data flows, some of those kind of things. But essentially, if you have a Power BI Premium instance, you get Fabric for free, for no additional cost. A Power BI, what we say is a premium, a P1 premium, which is kind of the entry level, converts or can kind of convert over into a Fabric. We'll get into the licensing stuff later, but so if your organization already has that, it should be as simple as kind of popping over into the or having someone pop into the admin portal and kind of turn on some of the Fabric features in the tenant. There are some new features kind of associated with Fabric, and I say associated. I mean, you're all used to Power BI making regular and consistent kind of upgrades to the service. So I kind of view these as more just kind of new Power BI features that are kind of timed with the release of Fabric. But things like GitHub integration, which is really may sound kind of esoteric or whatnot, but the implication of that is that we can finally do things like some real file diff kind of comparisons for a Power BI or a Power BI desktop kind of model to see, what's different between an old version and a new version. Those things have not always been easy to do. So that becomes powerful, and of course, just the kind of the code repository aspects of GitHub for backup and those kind of things. And then Copilot. You've all heard all about Copilot from Microsoft and various workloads across the Microsoft tool set. Copilot's come, I think now, actually just very recently became a fully kind of the preview mode kind of went wide. I don't think it's gone general availability yet, but you should be able to enable that now within your tenant to kind of get the advantage of some of those Copilot features to help you build. I think it's maybe most interesting to help you build DAX calculations, things like that in Power BI, which always kind of can be a stumbling block for people. But the one I really want to focus on today and talk most about is this new storage mode that's coming with Power BI, or with Fabric, I should say. And this maybe unlike the last two, this really does require the underlying Fabric infrastructure to take advantage of this. And it's a new storage mode. It's called Direct Lake, and it allows us to really achieve the full performance of. Well, let me back up. So you may or may not know that in the past there have been primarily two storage modes available to us in Power BI as you set up your data model. In fact, we'll jump ahead to this slide that kind of demonstrates it. So we've had this import mode, which has been the default mode. It's the way that likely many of your models are currently running. The way that works is it goes out to your various data sources that you've defined in your Power BI desktop model primarily. It queries those on some kind of a scheduled basis. Typically, it copies in a kind of cached version of the data from those sources, and that data, that cached version, then lives in the Power BI service, so that when users come into your reports and dashboards, they are querying that cached version of the data that exists out in the Power BI cloud. That's why when you look at a Power BI dashboard or a report and you filter it or click on a filter to cross-filter various reports, that's why that all happens so quickly. They've got a nice kind of cache version sitting up there, and everything can go real fast. The other version that we've historically had available to us is this direct query mode, which is kind of the antithesis of the import mode. It does not keep a cached copy in the cloud. Instead, as you navigate across your reports, it translates your query into let's say it translates it back to SQL for a SQL source, executes the query on the source database, and then sends the result back up. Of course, you get the real-time aspect of data if that's important for your organization, but you have to kind of pay that penalty of both kind of translating your query and then sending the data back and forth across the web to get the results. So real time but slow. This one's fast but not real time. You've got to schedule the results. So that brings us to Direct Lake, and the promise here is that we have a best of both worlds scenario where we get both the performance of import mode, but we get the real-time nature of direct query. And this is accomplished by having the source data in the OneLake in Fabric. In OneLake, our files are stored in this Parquet, this Delta-enabled Parquet format, and that is the format that the Direct Lake engine, if you will, allows that kind of speed of processing. Now, again, this is still in Microsoft's cloud. You're in Azure, in OneLake, but the benefit is that you no longer need to create a data model, a semantic model, and import that data. As soon as you write data to this environment, that's what we're going to show off here in a minute. it becomes immediately available in your Power BI reports. So this right now becomes kind of a third option for us. The other two are still going to remain and may have their use cases, but it's hard not to look at this and see this as kind of the future direction where Microsoft is taking Power BI. Again, they're not going to get rid of import mode or direct query mode anytime soon, but I think it's fair to say that this is probably where they're going to focus their attention. And it wouldn't surprise me that down the road that even data that kind of works in this old, I'm going to call it the old import model now, may eventually find itself being kind of loaded into the one lake behind the scenes and kind of operating in that way anyway. So I'm going to jump right in, and I think we're gonna jump over and do a little demo on this here quickly. Let's see if I can stop sharing and present my desktop. Can everybody see that now, or can someone give me a?
We can see it.
All right, thank you. That's actually not what I wanted. Where am I here? Oh, just go. So I'm just going to go to the Power BI portal. I've got a little demo workspace I've set up. Now, there's nothing in it right now. The only thing I will tell you is when you set it up, you're going to want to assign it to your Fabric capacity. Well, I should say either your Fabric capacity. If you haven't done this yet, there's a trial available right now. If people want to kind of play around with this, that's what I'm using currently as a trial capacity. They're still being pretty generous with the options there. And then if you have a premium capacity, you can assign it to the premium capacity as well. The only caveat there being, I think you still need to make sure that the Fabric workloads are enabled within your admin portal. But again, it needs to either be, it needs to be on one of these capacities in order to light up kind of the Fabric capabilities here. So a premium capacity, a Fabric capacity, or one of these trials. Otherwise, there's nothing special about this workspace. This is just a new Power BI workspace. Just real briefly here, the other thing, and some of you may have noticed this, but the concept of some of those other workloads or personas is what they're calling them within this Power BI workspace. And Power BI is now kind of, or this Power BI portal is now kind of the central hub for Fabric. I don't know if that means you're going to see a name change of this at some point as well, but the other thing right now, it's going to default still to your Power BI persona down here, but you have these other what they're calling personas. So these kind of shortcuts to different workloads that are down here, and really it kind of just customizes the kind of objects that you can see here when you click kind of this new shortcut to create new objects here within your workspace. But I'm going to start by creating what's called a warehouse in Fabric. You really got two ways to kind of connect and manage these Delta-enabled Parquet files in Fabric. You can create what's called a warehouse or a lakehouse. There are some subtle differences in terms of kind of the skill sets involved in what you need in order to be able to do that. But just know that both of them are really kind of virtual layers on top of the underlying files that exist within your one lake. They both create and manage those Delta-enabled Parquet files as the storage engine, storage component that sits behind these or sits beneath these. So being that I'm still in this kind of the Power BI persona, and you click new up here and you get kind of your typical kind of Power BI things, I'm just going to click the more options here. And when you do that, you can kind of see the full breadth of all of the Fabric objects that you can create. I'm going to focus first on this data warehouse. I'm just going to create a demo warehouse for us today. And what you should see here is something that looks a lot, for those of you who have some database or some SQL background, is going to look a lot like an empty database, because essentially that's what it is. It's going to have some default objects like you would when you create a new SQL Server database, for example, but it's not going to have any other real tables or data. I'm going to dump some dummy data out here real quick, and we can play around with something. So we've got, your kind of normal stuff here. So I'm just going to create a quick SQL query, and I've got some. Well, I had some. Hold on just a second. I lost my demo script. Okay. So I'm just going to create some real simple kind of customer product sales tables, populate them with a little bit of dummy data, and then we'll have a few tables to kind of play with here. We'll talk about different ways to kind of get data into this environment. This just happens to be one, so I'm kind of creating an empty database. I'm dumping some data into it, and I really want to show off how we turn this into a semantic model or a Power BI data model here, all within the environment, and how we can update that and what it means for kind of the real-time nature of some of those updates. So we've got some sample data here. If we update this over here now, I think we should see them in our table list. The other thing that we will see is, in fact, you can kind of see it up there. It says a default Power BI semantic model for fast reporting was created and automatically updated. So as part of creating that data warehouse, it's automatically even going to start us with a kind of a generic Power BI semantic model, which is historically something that we've had to pop over to Power BI Desktop to create. In this case, it's creating it for us. It's all happening out here. In fact, first of all, it's happening automatically, although we'll look at how we have to kind of play with that. Right now, you're just going to get a kind of a bare bones model with just these three tables and no relationships, those kind of things. But as soon as this lights up, we should be able to flip over to this model view, where you can do, well, again, which would look a lot like a Power BI model view, where you can do things like create your relationships. And I'm not sure why this is going so slow, other than I'm in a demo, and of course everything goes slower when you're in a demo. So what's happening kind of under the hood here is, as we're creating these, even though these look, like very standard kind of Power BI, or I'm sorry, very standard kind of T-SQL commands that you might run against a normal SQL Server database, the core difference here is that, unlike let's say an on-prem version of SQL Server, the underlying data store is not SQL files. In this case, it's actually writing files out to our OneLake. It's creating these again, these Delta enabled Parquet files as the storage engine, or as the storage layer, and writing these out to the OneLake. The warehouse here, the kind of the database infrastructure that gets kind of wrapped around this, is really more of a translation layer that allows you to kind of use your traditional SQL skills, your T-SQL kind of commands, and maybe even some of the management kind of stuff that you're used to from a database perspective, to be able to query that and kind of manipulate the data. You can still do a lot of the same things that you've always done in a database. You can write views and procedures and those kind of things if you want to use those to transform the data and things like that. Boy, this is not cooperating with me. Let's see if I just open it back up. As we switch back out here to the workspace node, so you'll notice we not only have this warehouse, but you can kind of see the associated semantic model that gets automatically created. Maybe we'll even kind of go into that. Still not showing any tables yet. Well, it's having a hard time pulling this up so that I can move forward here. So the next step here again would be to flip over to the model view, and the model view is going to look a lot like what you're used to in Power BI Desktop. You're going to see the names of our tables. We've got kind of 3 tables that I'm trying to show as the customer, sales, and products. We'll be able to create the relationship between those 3 by dragging, our customer ID from the customer table over to the customer ID on the sales table. That pull process is really identical to the way it's always worked in Power BI Desktop, for those of you familiar with that process. And that allows us to kind of define that, or kind of customize, I should say, that semantic model. Now, if need be, you can kind of riff on that semantic model and create multiple versions of it. Maybe you've got a need to publish a version that only includes a subset of tables that for a specific kind of user base or a set of reporting users. You can do that as well by creating additional semantic models on top of this data warehouse. But it's always a good idea to kind of customize the base model, because the derivative models that you build on top of that kind of inherit from this base model. At least that's kind of the intention there. So again, if you've got 10 or 15 tables, you come in here into the semantic model, you'd create all your relationships and maybe even some of the measures and things like that you might typically create in a Power BI data set. I was going to try to show off creating at least one simple measure here if this thing ever cooperates, and it does not seem like it wants to. So you can create measures, and essentially you can do most of what you have typically or traditionally been able to do in Power BI Desktop from a kind of a modeling perspective right here in the cloud. It's probably also worth noting, again, Power BI Desktop itself, that tool is going to continue to exist and be updated regularly. Although, again, it's not hard to see where Microsoft seems to be headed with a lot of this and trying to do as much of that. Really to be able to do as much of the Power BI Desktop kind of workload out here in the cloud. So it's pretty clear the direction is that moving forward, or at least down the road, probably that much of that kind of work is going to shift out here to the cloud as well.
Hey, Gary.
Yeah.
How does storage work? Because obviously, if I put a lot of data in here,
mm-hmm.
At what point do I get charged more? Do you know how that works?
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit on the licensing side, but storage. So as you license Power BI, you're going to pay for kind of the capacity, which is really kind of the compute engine. Storage, like is done in so many Azure workloads, is separate, and so you're paying kind of regular storage rates in Azure, which is like 2 cents a gigabyte or something like that. I think there may be some base level of storage that's included in the Fabric capacity. There's been some discussion about what that is. I need to go back and check to see if they give you, maybe a few, maybe 100 gigabytes to start or something like that. But yeah, it certainly, as you fill it up, you'll pay some kind of an incremental cost for your storage. Well, I'll tell you what.
And Gary, John, do you mind stating your question?
Yeah, a little bit of a typo though. So like when it shifts, like with Fabric, when it's in the cloud, does it, like when I think of desktop, like I'm able to manipulate things on my machine, basically, on my machine when we use desktop. But like when it switches to Fabric like that, are more people going to be able to work with the data and look at the code?
If by code you mean kind of the Power BI Desktop file?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Potentially. So I'm gonna, unfortunately, this is just not cooperating. I'm gonna kind of skip to one of the thing I wanted to show you, and maybe that will help answer your question here, John. Is that so? In this case, I was creating a simple warehouse, kind of manually populating it with some T-SQL to give it, it's just some kind of base data for us to look at. But one of the other ways that we can get data into this environment is a way that hopefully a lot of you will be familiar with, and that's with at least what in here they're calling data flow Gen 2. But if I pop this up and look at, hopefully this will look really familiar for all of you, or for a number of you anyway. This is essentially Power Query. What they've done is they've taken the Power Query engine that a lot of people are familiar with from Power BI Desktop. Again, that's where you typically do a lot of your data transformations. And kind of massage your data into the format that you want it to look like. I'm just going to pull in an example here just from an Excel data source, just to give you an idea of what this looks. And I'll show you the important distinction here between what Power Query has traditionally been and what they're kind of allowing it to do now. So I'm just pulling in a real kind of simple date table. I'm going to pull it in here, and then again, this is, for those of you that are familiar at all with Power BI Desktop and kind of that Power Query window that pops up when you want to import data or bring data in. You've got, I've connected to an Excel. You've got your ability to do all the Power Query things. As far as I know, there's feature parity here between Power BI Desktop, so I can remove columns, rename things, pivot data around, do whatever I want to do to this data here in again, in the workspace, in this, what they're calling this data flow Gen 2, and like a lot of these things, that's named horribly. I agree, but the output of this is where the real is kind of the star of the show here. So traditionally, and you've been able to create things like this even in Power BI Premium with things called their data flows in Power BI. But the output of that has always just been really kind of a Power BI object that other Power BI entities can connect to, but it was kind of landlocked in that way. With this data flow Gen 2, and it may be a little small if you can read that, but you see we've got 4 different options on where to send this data after it's been transformed and kind of cleaned up or massaged or whatever you call it. We can send that data, in our case, directly to our warehouse. We could send it to that Lakehouse version, which is kind of similar to a warehouse. We can also send it directly to an Azure SQL database. This doesn't even have to be a database that is associated with our Fabric environment. If you just got your own Azure SQL database instance somewhere outside of Fabric, it can connect to that, and you can use this as essentially an ETL tool to get data into your environment. So you just, in our case, we're connecting it to the warehouse that's already in this workspace, makes it even easier. We connect to it, and I would just tell it to use that demo warehouse. It maps the data right in. In this case, it's going to create a new table. It's going to figure out all the data types. You can tell it whether to append data to that table if you want to just have something that regularly loads it or replace it, and then go. And then it really becomes kind of like a traditional Power BI object in that you have the ability to schedule this. So if you've got data coming in from, in this case, some kind of an Excel file that lives in your environment that people update every day for status changes or something, you can schedule this data flow to go out. The settings here look a lot like what Power BI looks like. I can't see them just yet because it's still saving, but you can schedule that refresh to happen multiple times a day. It will run this little Power Query process. The data gets sent out to that warehouse endpoint, this demo warehouse that we created. But really what happens behind the scenes there is it writes those files to our OneLake as that Delta-enabled Parquet files. Since those files exist on our OneLake, we can connect our semantic model to them and query them right away. And so essentially, as soon as this thing finishes, every time this thing finishes running, we're immediately able to see our data in the Power BI reports that we have associated with that. There's no need to do another data set refresh, like we've always, well, I said like we've traditionally had to do in Power BI. And that just the data shows up there. And so I apologize that little demo I had here didn't seem to really be behaving, but I'm starting to run. The tables are finally there now. So just maybe I can run through this real quick. So here's kind of the model view. We've got a couple just kind of internal tables here, but we've got kind of our 3 tables. Again, we can create our relationships real quickly. This looks just like the other way around. Kind of what you're probably used to in Power BI, where you can create those, drag those on here. And then just as an example here, we can do a new report. Actually, I was going to have it do an auto create a report for us. Oops. So we can pick our demo warehouse, and I'm going to use this auto create, which I almost never use, but it's handy for a demo. So we have our data here right now, just to kind of highlight here, we've got, data from, there's not a whole lot here, but January and February. If we pop back over into our demo warehouse, let's save that, I guess. Pop back over into our warehouse. We were going to just do a quick update. I'm just going to insert a few more rows for March, just so we have some March data in here. Pop back over to that sample report. Now, again, this is it's updating in real time, but it's not streaming data. So it's not, there are ways to do streaming data in Power BI. You're not going to immediately see this thing just kind of tick up, but it's just because I've already kind of run this report and it's cached on here. But anybody that runs it again or opens it up the next time or just hits this refresh button, you're immediately going to see that March data pulled into our data set. So this is, again, just a Power BI report. But you see, we didn't have to do any kind of a Power BI data refresh or model reload or anything like that. It's querying that data out in the OneLake and pulling it in real time. Now, I know that may not be impressive in my little 20-row data model here, but they really have some impressive demos that do this. Microsoft's shown this off over like 1 billion rows of data, which is, when they first showed this off, it was really hard to believe that they could get the same kind of import level performance on a model that was basically pulling data in real time from the OneLake. I don't know all the ins and outs, how they get that done under the hood, but the performance here is impressive. I will say that there are probably still some use cases that import mode is going to be a little bit better suited for it. Some of the more advanced DAX calculations can sometimes cause problems with this OneLake mode or direct lake mode. I would envision Microsoft continuing to kind of close the gap, but for the time being, some of those still exist. So the takeaway here is that that if you have a smaller to medium-sized model that's already working fine and the data underneath it may not be refreshing all that frequently, there may not be an immediate need to switch over to something like this OneLake mode. I would say just kind of continue as is. But I will admit that one of the real benefit to this kind of an approach from kind of an architectural standpoint is our data now, all the work that you've potentially done in Power Query to kind of model your data. And by the way, with these data flows, those Gen 2 data flows that I showed you, where you can kind of run all this Power Query in the lake, you could pretty easily transition over maybe a model that you already have by kind of copying that Power Query code up here to run in a data 2 or a Gen 2 data flow, and basically allow it to create the outputs of all those Power Query tables in your OneLake without really having to do much rework. the real benefit you get on the other side of this is I'm sure that some of you have come across a need or a desire to be able to take the nice data you've cleaned up and published in your Power BI data models and do other things with it, allow other tools to potentially connect to it, maybe use it to send data to another, maybe a vendor application or export. But it's always been a little bit landlocked in terms of being in a Power BI model that's not maybe the easiest for other tools to connect to. Now in this world, and this is all kind of the data itself is all exposed here within your data warehouse. You have a SQL endpoint that allows you to run all of your traditional kind of SQL commands against it, and you could do anything you can think of with it at that point. So, all right, I spent a little more time. I think. Were there any other questions before I just jump over to the licensing stuff? Because I'm already a little behind where I wanted to be.
No more questions right now.
Okay, let me jump back to the. Connected my. Can't find Windows. I'm juggling too much. Here we go.
We're not seeing your screen now.
Yeah, no. There we go. Okay.
We see it.
Okay. I got to get back to my slide. Okay. So I want to talk about licensing real quick. I alluded to the fact that that Power BI Premium is kind of analogous. If you already have Power BI Premium, you can kind of convert it over to Fabric. Fabric is licensed in this, and very similarly to Power BI Premium, it's all capacity based. You're renting, essentially, think of it as renting a server out in Azure or in Fabric that's dedicated to your Fabric workload. The really appealing thing here is that the Power BI Premium is analogous to this, what they're calling this F64. Everything's based on these what they're calling capacity units now in Fabric. This used to be kind of the entry point for Power BI Premium is all the way up here. So you see right off the bat, you've got a number of different levels, easier ways to get started. In fact, you can get started for as little as $156 a month when you do a reservation. A reservation is just a 1-year commitment to Fabric, to a Fabric capacity. And even if you just want to try it out and do more of a pay-as-you-go model, you can start for as low as $260 a month or so. So the entry point is there's a lot lower entry barrier than there's traditionally been on the Power BI side. As we mentioned earlier, the cost of the storage costs are separate, but that's really the only variable cost involved here. And so the previous licensing models for Power BI are all still there and are not really expected to go away anytime soon. If you already have Power BI Premium, there's probably not much of a reason not to kind of convert it over to Fabric, or I guess at least kind of think of it in those terms. You just Microsoft has essentially lit up a number of additional features for you. And we'll talk about real quickly here what that might mean or how you could take advantage of that. But the only thing to kind of point out here is again, since that F64 is kind of the entry level, or historically has been the entry level for Power BI Premium, and you'll notice again the price is essentially Power BI Premium has always been about, I think it's maybe just a few dollars more or less than that, but essentially the same price as this F64 model. If you want to get started with Fabric at one of these lower levels, the F2 through the F32, you still get all of the Fabric features. The only thing you really kind of miss out on from Power BI Premium is you don't have the ability to have unlimited report consumers connect to, let's say, like an F2 version of Fabric. So you still need individual pro licenses for your user base. So Let's just talk about one quick scenario, what that could look like. So if you're kind of a smaller shop, maybe you just have 50 or so Power BI users, and you've been using, you've wanted kind of the some of the Power BI premium capability, but you weren't ready to go all the way up to a premium capacity. So you've been doing the Power BI premium per user SKU, which allows you to get premium features for $20 a month per user, as opposed to the traditional kind of Power BI Pro at $10 a month. So at $50 a month, you're spending $1,000 right now. With Fabric, you can pretty easily bump those users down to that old Pro model and save yourself $500 a month for that. Still get onto again, kind of maybe an entry level Fabric capacity, where you're just paying $156 a month if you do the reservation. Spend a total of just $650 or so, save yourself $350, and really at that point, even though you're just on that F2 level of Fabric, from a feature standpoint, you have everything Microsoft has to offer from Fabric. There are no feature walls there or gates that you have to go through at different levels to get different features. You can create warehouses like we showed. You can create those data flows that pump data into them. You can even get into all the the data science workloads kind of stuff that we didn't get a chance to talk about. You can do it all, even with that F2 entry level Fabric capacity. The caveat there is, at some point, those are based on kind of a processing unit. At some point, you'll get to the point where if you're overloading it, doing too much, then it's going to slow down performance and kind of across the workspace. So unlike we had Power BI Premium, you had kind of the shared workspace where all your Power BI imports and things like that were kind of consuming resources. Your reporting users consuming resources, and again, at some point, you might decide that the resources were a little constrained, and you'd bump up to a P2 or a P3. Same thing is still true here with the addition of all these other workloads that could also consume some of those resources. Power BI or Fabric does have a way to kind of burst and smooth those resource usage kind of across time. So to kind of mitigate maybe some of the constraint issues, but just know that if you overload one of these, that you could see some throttling and performance issues, and may decide you need to bump up. So that's one. Now, maybe on the kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, you've already got a Power BI Premium instance or capacity, but you've also been doing a lot in Synapse. We haven't really talked about Synapse. Synapse is kind of the old now platform as a service or PaaS offering that really does a lot of the same things. It also includes the data warehousing and data pipelines, factories, that kind of stuff. You built out this environment over the past few years. You may want to look at shifting away from that PaaS Synapse environment and shifting a lot of those workloads over into your Fabric capacity. You may be able to just, again, convert over to this Fabric F64, your P1 over to that, and you may have enough headroom to even incorporate all the Synapse work you've already been doing. In which case, you basically just eliminate all the costs on the Synapse side and save yourself a lot of money. Maybe you need to bump up to the next level in Fabric, in which case you still may save some money. The real benefit, I think, to organizations here is the flat, consistent pricing. The Synapse, as anyone who's played with that much knows, especially on the Data Factory side, can be highly variable in terms of what your spend looks like every month. If you're doing a lot of development, let's say, and running a lot of Data Factory jobs, those are consumption-based pricing. So the more you use, the more you spend, and you can easily see a bill really spike from month to month because of usage. Here on Fabric, you're paying the same price every month. You know what it's going to be. You're going to have to manage your workload and kind of spread out your usage, but much more consistent from a budgeting standpoint in terms of what your costs are going to be. And then you get away from the PaaS environment into a SaaS offering where everything's managed for you, and you can kind of alleviate a lot of the headaches involved there. So things to think about kind of on both ends of the spectrum there, and some things that Fabric, I think, have to offer. So
Hey, Gary, a
Yeah.
couple quick questions. First, how is the performance on low capacity nodes levels below F64?
how does like an F2 or something compare to an F64?
From a
Well,
performance perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give the consultant's answer and say it depends. But I mean, if you just think about, from a raw processing standpoint, this should have 32 times more power. Now, that's not necessarily going to translate to 32 times better performance. It's going to depend on, if you've got big data and it's taken a long time to process in, let's say, like a data flow kind of thing, or if you're still doing import mode Power BI semantic models, your mileage is going to vary. I will say, just in kind of playing, I think this is essentially what they give you when you run a trial. This little F2, it's not cripple. I mean, you can get surprisingly good results out of it. And again, what it does with this bursting is, if you have a workload that might really benefit from having 8 capacity units involved, Power BI or Fabric will still allow you to kind of burst up to a level above your 2 capacity units, kind of the processing, for a small amount of time. And then what it'll do is it essentially allows you to kind of borrow time from the next, I think it's the next 24-hour period, and kind of smooth it out across that. With the caveat being that, if you borrow from the future and then you have another big workload come up later, it's not always going to be there. But it's not a hard cap. There's some thought that's gone into how to smooth that across like I say, a 24-hour period. So again, I think that my recommendation would be to start as small as you possibly think you can get away with, and then it's easy to level these things up as well.
And Gary, as a follow-up to that, can you select how many core processors? This is similar to Premium now, where you can pick cores by P nodes.
Well, again, you're paying for what they're calling capacity units. That's some measure of processing capability. It's not completely analogous to a core that you would buy on a server, but you can think of it in those ways somewhat. So again, no, there's not a core. You can't add cores, but you add these capacity units. So if you start with an F2, you find that's not enough, then you scale up to an F4. You do have to kind of scale them logarithmically here. You kind of you double them each time. And again, you can kind of move around a little bit as well. Maybe you do a reservation on an F4, and if you need to scale up later to an F8, even for maybe a small amount of time, I think you can kind of pay the difference for a pay-as-you-go period or something like that. So that's always the real question, though, is how do you size those right? There's not a good answer for that. Microsoft's promising some kind of a calculator here soon, but I think mileage is going to vary with that as well. Yeah.
Gary, switching over to Daryl's question, does Fabric work as a premium capacity workspace? And then the second question is when publishing reports.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Doug?
Yes. Does Fabric work as a premium capacity workspace? And then the follow-up question is, how about when publishing reports?
It does. Again, with the caveat here being that if you have a Fabric capacity below F64, you can still do you get all the premium features, with data marts and data flows. The only difference is that if for consumers of the reports, your consumers are going to need to be pro licensed if you don't have at least an F64. If you get up to F64 or higher, then yes, it's going to work from a Power BI perspective exactly like a Power BI Premium instance would, where anybody that connects to it, that has permission, of course, is going to be able to view those reports without any additional licenses needed.
Excellent. Kenny has a good question here. Is all storage costs separate for all SKU levels? And then his follow-up is anything included with the F64 P1?
The amount that's included was the one there's been some discussion about. I'm not sure where they landed on that. There was some discussion on that over the summer when it was still in preview. This Fabric, by the way, has gone general availability as of late last year. I'll have to go back and double check. I think there was some thought that they would include some base level of storage, and then you'd be paying these. That's essentially, what is that, $23 a terabyte, 2 cents a gigabyte. So you'd be paying anything beyond kind of what they give you as a separate storage cost.
Very good. Kenny, did that answer your question? I think it did.
I know we're just about out of time, so I just want to follow up, finish up here with just this last offering. And Doug mentioned this, I think up top, but this has been pretty high level, and we've just really talked about kind of the Power BI aspects of this. But if you're interested in going more in depth on Fabric itself, or really talking about what kind of this modern data warehousing, or kind of the evolution of modern data warehousing looks like with Fabric, let us know. We're happy to come out and bring lunch and kind of have a little spitballing session with you and kind of dig into it a little more deeply. And then if you're ready to get going and want to kind of kick things off and kind of get started with kind of a base model, we've always got this, what we call our kind of Power BI Jumpstart offering, which is, like a 4 to 6 week kind of engagement where we kind of help lay the groundwork for what one of these environments should look like and help get you started, maybe do a little training with your organization or with your staff as well to kind of talk about how to evolve and maintain one as well. So
very good. Hey, Gary, thank you so much. And everyone that joined us, hey, thank you all for taking the time to join us today. As we said, we will be making the slides and the recording available. But please let us know if you're interested in receiving the recording or the slides. And as Gary said, if you're interested in learning more about any of these topics we covered today, please let us know. And that is all we have for today. Thank you, Gary. Great job.
all right, thanks everyone.